Greetings, friends. I hope that you're having a fruitful time in digging up things of your past. It's kind of like being an archaeologist, where you go one level at a time, unearthing your life. And you probably have noticed by now, if you're doing your life mapping, that some of the things we unearth are not so pleasant. And I'd have to say that the two frames that I'm um, presenting to you are very dark. Okay, they weren't happy times, um, but as I look back, they were so foundational. God uses dark times in some ways, probably um, in a deeper way than when things seem to be going all that right. So it's messy. And what I'm sharing to you is it's my messiness, you know. Not proud of a lot of what happened, but it is what it is. So I told you in my last frame that my college years had um, had a lot to do with these encounters with God. And by the time I was a senior, I was like walking on cloud nine. You, I was just looking forward to getting done with college and going to seminary. And it's just filled with all sorts of expectation, delight. Um, but it just didn't start off very well at all, you see, because probably one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to me right during the week of graduation at college. As I told you before, I wasn't a very popular guy, but I think some people got the idea that, I was kind of a spiritual guy. And so the people who were running the graduation banquet said, oh, we'll have John talk, okay? Tell something spiritual. And so I was to give a reflections talk. And it was there that I found out that I was not a comedian. I I started a talk off with trying to be funny with a string of jokes, and they weren't funny. And as I went on and on, I kept on saying the jokes, and I could see people shifting in their chairs, like, when's this guy going to sit down? Oh my goodness. And I could tell that was happening. But by the time I got to the really serious thing I wanted to share, that is God's encounters and how important they are in their life, I'd lost everyone. And I couldn't even speak with conviction. And I just wanted to die. The whole school, the graduating class, professors, everything. I cannot tell you how that stung in my heart for years afterwards. Well, that event also spurred on something that I will call the dark night of the soul. Because before that time, God was at my beck and call, so to speak, and the lake and the forests, and around the school. But I go out now, it's like the heavens were complete, a dome of steel. And my prayers, as pitiful as they were just bounced back down at me. And so it's interesting, that night, I, I decided to start journaling. And so that's my first journal was, oh, so painful to try to sort this out. And I've been journaling basically for the rest of my life, even up to now, to some degree. Okay, let's see here. So the summer of 1977, I began seminary. And it took me 2 years to graduate with an MAR, which is a Master of Art in Religion. And it was in biblical studies, and it was specifically biblical studies. I didn't want to do anything pastoral because I didn't want to be a pastor. I was all into becoming a teacher because I thought a teacher was superior to a pastor in my intellectual whatever, But at that time, I was in a spiritual desert. It was really, really dry. Yeah. However, in 1978 and 79, I want to talk to you a little bit about my readings, okay? Because as you know by now, I've been very influenced by books, just how I'm wired. You may not be a big reader, and that's okay. It's no, you know, every one of us is different and unique. But you just need to really focus on what things that really, really do influence you, and books influence me. In my despair, in my dark despair, and that's all I could say. Before Jesus is so real, now he wasn't real at all. I mean, it's just like everything spiritual is just off the map. I was in the bookstore, a Presbyterian bookstore at that, and I saw, as I was looking down on the shelf, a book. And on the cover it said, The Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. As soon as my eyes were on it, it was in my hands, and I knew in my heart of hearts that there was somebody who knew what I was going through and could talk to me about it. And from that moment on, St. John of the Cross has been kind of like a leading star, like the North Star that always keeps me centered in life. Now, I picked it up. I didn't really understand too much of it, but I did understand this much, and that is the whole idea of spiritual gluttony. Like in college, God seemed to come at my beck and call. If I wanted to go out praying, he was there. And it's kind of like, whoa, it's like, what a spiritual high. It's kind of like drugs, And I was thinking of myself, no one else seems to be experiencing this. I must be real special. And I'd come down like Moses from the mount, with a halo over my head, spiritual pride. And that's what the Dark Knight tries to deal with. If God chooses for you, or for me to experience the night, it's to bring us to humility. So, anyways, John of the Cross, very important to me. And, I would read other stuff, like an important commentary in Ecclesiastes, open that book in the Bible up to me very much. And I'd read, sometimes like something a little bit out of my realm of theology, David Copperfield, I remember reading that. But more importantly, I remember reading Thomas Merton's Seven-Storey Mountain, because I remember I asked one of my fellow students there, who was a church historian. I said, I've always been sort of interested in monks. I don't know who they are or what they are, being a Baptist. So are there really monks now? He said, oh yeah, sure. What about Thomas Merton's Seven-Storey Mountain? I said, oh really? Cool. So I ran to the store and got Merton's Seven-Storey Mountain. And I remember this when I was reading that, it was so enlightening to me. Oh wow, But between John of the Cross and Merton, boy, I'll tell you, those were steps toward the Catholic Church. I didn't realize it at the time, but they were very important. So a lot of people have a Merton time in their life, and I had a Merton time. I read everything I could get my hands on with Merton, but not quite yet. That happened a little bit later. Now, in the spring of 1979, I met, in quotes, Judy. That's not her real name, but it was a young lady, and came from a wonderful family, and at church. And, up to this time, I was like 24, and I had never dated. I never dated in high school, never dated in college, and even in seminary. And the truth of the matter is, I was very socially backward and insecure. and immature. Okay, I mean, in some ways, I was very mature for my age, spiritually, with the things I was reading, the things I was experiencing about God. But it's very true that we can be really, really mature in some way, but very immature in others. You know? And that's true with me. You know, I had a lot of catching up, I had a lot of growing up to do. And so I met Judy, and the spring of 1980, engaged to Judy, and spring of 1981, married to Judy. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later. I figured, well, I'm 24, I'm ready for this, you know, and it turned out that I really wasn't. And let me tell you, you know, I was married for 9 years to, you know, Judy, and the first 2 years were the most harmonious as I remember them. But I think we started drifting apart spiritually in 1984, um, and that intensified in 1988 when I began teaching in seminary full time. As I look back, you know, I was probably very, on one hand, very arrogant about my spirituality, um, and I'd have to say that, you know, um, I just have to say a lot of this was my fault. I was oblivious, okay, and not fully engaged relationally. I just didn't have those skills, you know, and so it's part of my growing up. So, uh, but on the other hand, I began to read St. Augustine daily for a number of years. I remember my um, college professor I talked to you about earlier, John Piper. He said, you know, you ought to read one great theologian and read him every day, so you get to really go deep with one person. And I said, wow, St. Augustine, you know, I've heard of him. I'd like to know more about him. So I would just read, you know, volumes of St. Augustine, you know, his letters, his confessions, his homilies, and John, you know, his theology, you know. So I've always had this deep love for Augustine. In fact, I named my son's middle name Augustine. So very big in my life, you know. Okay, I began doctoral studies at what it's not called. It sounds like a disease, but it's spelled differently. The Dropsy College in the fall of 1980. And I had an advisor, Dr. Stephen Geller, and Geller was um, an elite scholar. He was Harvard trained. He brilliant, and he taught me critical thinking. I'll never forget. Um, After getting to know me for about a week, he said, he was always very formal. He said, "Mr. Wardle, you don't even know how to think." And I thought to myself, I know. Please teach me. You know, it's funny. At the end of uh, 6 years of working with me, I wrote a letter of gratitude. I called him my Professor Higgins, and I was his Liza Doolittle. um, so he taught me critical thinking, how to think. Okay, and here I am. I'm in doctoral work, and I really never learned how to think. How I got into the program, like how I got into just about anything in life, is just by the sheer grace of God. Okay. Um, so I really got into the humanities, language skills. You know, I had to learn grammar. I never knew it before. And some research, you know, had to do that with my doctoral work in poetry and literary criticism. So it helped me really build my knowledge of the scriptures. I mean, big time. And it was through a Jewish professor. And he taught me how to look at the Old Testament, not through the eyes of my 16th century Reformed eyeglasses, okay, which I saw everything, but it taught me to look at the Old Testament through the eyes of the ancients, which, by the way, is sacramental. another step in the direction of the Catholic Church. But then at that time, I had no idea that that's where I was headed. A little bit by little bit, you know. Let's see if there's anything else here that we can talk about. Yeah, I began teaching a small home group for the church. Up to this point, I just focused on my studies. So we, um, you know, uh, uh, doing something now to contribute and doing a small group. And I learned a lot by doing that too. Okay. And then some of the important readings of this time was a little book that had such a huge influence on me. It's called Those About to Die. That's what the gladiators would say. Hail Caesar, uh, those about to die greet you, you know. And they had a picture of these Romans in the Colosseum. And, you know, I never knew anything about the classical world. And so I read this little book. And all of a sudden, ancient Rome opened up to me. That had hugely perked my interest in the Greco-Roman world. Okay, I would read Durant's History of Civilization, big old thick tomes. You know, try to get through them. Another old and quaint source, which no one ever even knows about nowadays, is a Frenchman named Taine, who wrote 3 volumes on English literature. So I read that. And then Sir James Frazer, The Golden Bough. That was a famous 19th century book, basically about myth and how the human mind thinks religiously in the ancient world. And I got into all sorts of readings to help me understand the pagan world around Israel. You hear a lot about Baalism in the Bible. What is it? What is the pagan world and all the myths that are involved in it? That was hugely influential to me as well. So these are dark times. This is a dark chapter, 1977 to 1983. But a lot of things were happening. You know, I mean, a failed relationship, which was serious. You know, and spiritually dry. But and when you're in a dark night, you know, in hindsight, I learned you should put yourself under a spiritual mentor, which I didn't have. Because you make big decisions when you're not thinking right. That's no good. But in my tradition, spiritual mentors, you know, it just we just didn't really think about that too much. You know? I mean, yeah. So we're certainly having a confessor. That's not in the Baptist world, that's for sure. So. Okay, let's look at the second chapter here. You know, when you think about yours, you unearth some tough things about your life, and you make mistakes. You hurt people. Life's messy, but those are very important lessons to learn, because that's how we learn. You know, from the hard knocks of life. So, my next chapter is chapter 6, Becoming a Man. And you may say, John, you got to be kidding. It wasn't until your late 20s and early 30s that you became a man? You know, I'm a baby boomer. What can you say? It took baby boomers a lot more time to grow up, I guess. So anyways, uh, after 7 years of the dark night, Somehow, during 7 years, I knew that God would not abandon me. I knew he'd come back, or me come back to him. And so I had an illness in 1984, and it's my sixth encounter. I was reading, there's a famous Baptist preacher called Charles Spurgeon. I was reading his autobiography. And I had one of those sicknesses that C.S. Lewis calls a really good one. You're too sick to get up and about, but you're well enough to read. I've had so few of those in my life. And for 3 or 4 days in this flu, I was like levitating in my bed. I was like, wow, God came back. And my soul was filled with joy and with heaven. And it was like, okay, John, you've been struggling with this dark night for 7 years. It's time for you to go to the next thing. So if you are in a dark place and a dark night doesn't mean you're going to be there forever. Sometimes it's a long time, depending on what God wants to teach you. And not everything's a dark night. Sometimes we bring upon our own spiritual darkness just by our behaviors and choices and what have you. So that's not the dark night I'm talking about, or St. John of the Cross is talking about. He's talking about those who've had a very powerful time with God and with certain encounters and what have you. And you start getting proud, like I said before, and that God withdraws himself to humble you and to help you get to the next level. So that's what the dark night in a nutshell is about. So what else do we have here? With the sixth encounter, 3 things resulted. A deeper desire to preach or teach. They began teaching Sunday school as well as home Bible study. And Judy was not quite on board with this direction that I was taking, and that facilitated, our drift apart. And at least that's how I remembered it. I read the Puritans deeply, and you say, oh my goodness, who are the Puritans? Well, I'm not going to get into that. But they're like 16th and 17th century English, I would call them doctors of the soul. They weren't writers of theological treatises as much as how does theology, how does the Bible impact the soul? So they're kind of like doctors of the soul. They're very hard to read through. It's like sifting through gold. They're very verbose and everything like that. But at least they were talking to me about Jesus. And so I know a lot of people say, look down at Puritans and being puritanical. But one teacher once told me, don't get down at what you're not up on. So unless you have read the Puritans, you really shouldn't say anything about that. So, that was something, a very important phase in my life. Okay, and then as I emerged toward the end of my doctoral studies, I had an opportunity to teach at a school called Manna Bible Institute in Philadelphia, which is inner city school. And I was there for 2 years, and as I was able to get done with my graduate work, to actually put my own ideas together on the Bible in teaching these classes. And so that was a very formative time for me, putting my ideas together, which will propel me into the rest of my life, even into my priesthood as a Catholic. Okay, in the summer of 1986, I began to teach Greek at a place called Seminary of the East, SOE, which is a Baptist seminary. And of the East, because we taught out of church locations on the Eastern Seaboard, Philadelphia, Worcester, up in Boston area, Manhattan, um, Queens, New York area, and even eventually to Washington. And so that was a wonderful privilege to teach there and have that opportunity. I was there for quite a few years. In May '87, I finished my graduate program. And as I told you, Thomas Merton cropped up again, especially after I graduated. I remember picking up No Man is an Island and The Sign of Jonah, which is sort of a biography of his life in the seminary. And No Man is an Island, or not in seminary where he was, but at Gethsemane. But No Man is an Island, I remember picking that up and trying to read it, and I couldn't make any sense out of it. At that time, I was still reading the Puritan. And then 6 months later, I picked it up, and all of a sudden, it all made sense. His mystical theology and all that stuff sort of just was so wonderful. And so I really had a big Merton time at that time. Okay, let's see what else we have here. I was peer mentored by George Renner. He was about 5 years older than me on staff. He was the New Testament professor, and I was the Old Testament professor. And he just taught me thinking outside the box, and so many wonderful spiritual formation resources. And I mean, just it's one of those people in your life that just really changed things around for me. I'm eternally thankful for him. In May of 1990, Judy left me. She divorced me in January 1991. And then the whole thing, when I think about it, is like kind of like lost my innocence and my boyhood of immaturity. It's like a slap in the face to wake up. And I started becoming a man. And when she left, it leaves you a big hole in you if you ever experience some kind of like a divorce, And so you want to fill that up right away. And I met Lucy. That's different. Another, not her real name, but in weakness, and she became kind of like I'd say a feminine archetype to me, like the archetypal beautiful woman motif, And fortunately, at this time, I placed myself under the authority of a mentor, an older senior professor at my seminary. And he said, in so many words, John, you're not thinking right. She's not the right one for you. Oh, yeah, she is. And this is just, again, a result of my immaturity. But I just had to grow out of it. And he told me to leave her alone for 6 months. Don't even communicate or anything like that. And so I was obedient. And that was a big deal. It really was. I placed myself under obedience to spiritual direction. So for 6 months, I'm saying, oh, wow, I can't wait to, to communicate with her, blah, 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 blah. After 6 months, she lost all interest in me. And I was thinking, oh, no. And I just had this huge broken heart. And I remember in my house, I remember some doing mundane thing like ironing my clothes. I don't iron now, but back then, I had to take care of myself, and I turned to Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind, all your mind and all your soul. And as I was, brokenhearted and feeling sorry for myself, the question came to my mind: can I love God more than I think I love this woman, Lucy? And a resounding yes reverberated in my heart. And that was huge, because up to that moment, I was teaching Bible. And I had a lot of knowledge that put together over the years to teach it. But from that moment on, my teaching had zip to it, and it was the love of God. And so I thank God for this experience, although it doesn't put me in a good light. Uh, but anyways, part of my messy life. Then another thing here. I read a book by Rudolph Otto, which, interesting enough, I read in C.S. Lewis's book list that Rudolph Otto had a huge influence on him. And when it's called The Idea of the Holy. And, up to this point, I had some kind of a, pedantic view of holiness, like, it's just a moral thing, you do what's right, and so on and so forth. He expanded the whole idea, so the deep richness of the idea. So that was huge in my life. Another book read. So, what do we have? We began to see an emergence out of darkness. I had to become mature. I had to grow into manhood. And it's not pretty. But think about your life, Don't be afraid to put things there that, that maybe give you some bad feelings or are scared to unearth. It's all good because everything here you learn from. It's part of growing up. And it's part of growing in the Lord because the Lord is in all of this stuff. And you'll see that He's protected you from a lot, but sometimes He doesn't. He allows you to go your way and knowing that you have a lesson you have to learn and to draw you back into Himself in a deeper and richer way. So, there it is. 2 more chapters of my life. How are your chapters going? God bless you.